Let's talk about purposeful hearts. Purposeful hearts as a characteristic of people who are walking on the way of holiness. A characteristic of people who are walking in close proximity to God, who is holy. Remember, we're talking about new vocabulary for the holy life, living the life of holiness day in and day out. Not based upon rules and regulations, not based upon what we should not do, but based upon proximity with God, whose very nature is holy. So as we walk day in and day out with God, who is holy, we too will begin to become holy as He is holy, you see. This is not rocket science. It's not a list of formulas. And all of these characteristics are really descriptors. They're not standards that I'm asking you to live up to. They're not goals that I'm asking you to strain for in your own human energy. These are descriptive characteristics of what begins to take place in your life as you walk daily in closer and closer proximity, intimacy, relationship with God. Because God is holy, God's holiness will rub off on you. Well, if God's holiness is rubbing off on you because you're walking close to God day in and day out in everything you do, then what are the characteristics? What are the descriptors? What's going to take place in your life that will show the evidence of this close proximity with a holy God? Well, we will be holy as He is holy. And some of those descriptors are what we've been talking about in this series on Masterful Living. And you can read more about it in the book called Masterful Living. You can get it at Amazon or on the kevinmanoia.com website. But here I want to dial into one of those descriptors today. We've been treating each one, and now we come to this one that is really fundamental. Not that it's more important than the others or that the others are less important, but this one really captures the heart because it describes the purpose for which we do anything we do, especially loving people and loving others. Purposeful hearts. What was the purpose for God sending Jesus into the world to reconcile us, bring us back close to Himself? It was love. It was love. Now, we read about that, and Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians. He talks about we can pursue everything else, but if we don't have love, then we're just a clanging cymbal. We talk about how Jesus is the manifestation of God's love for us. We even call Holy Week Passion Week. It is the passionate expression of God's love for humanity that He sent Christ. God so loved the world. So you see, behind every action of God, there is this compelling motive of love. Now, it's important to call it a motivating love because there are some false loves out there that we know about that can kind of misguide us. You see, this kind of love drove God to initiate engagement with us. Once we, the human race, had made selfish choices to break the proximity, to become strangers to God, to get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, you see, once we made those choices and became distant, we began to devolve, disintegrate, to become warped and broken and skewed and dirtied, and the image of God became unseen or unclear in us. And yet God, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, is motivated by a love for His creation. God did not wait around for us to come back to Him and knock on the door and say, please, can you let us back in? God did not wait around for us to raise our hand and say, would you please love me? God did not wait around for us to come and confess that we know we had offended Him and we had made selfish choices that created estrangement and a broken relationship with God. No. God took the initiative. God initiated sending methods, means to bring us back into a relationship with him through the Old Testament, the prophets, the priests, the kings, the judges, the law, all of these things. And then the book of Hebrews says, in these last days, he sent his son Jesus as the ultimate expression of his love for us to bring us back to himself. You see, the compelling purpose for God's action was love. And it was a motivating love that drove him not to wait around for us to ask, but drove him to initiate expressing his own love for us. So you see, God's love is a motivating love. Whether or not we deserve it, whether or not we perform well, God loves you. When we talk about love, it's very easy for us to get confused with what I call a responsive love. I love you because you gave me that gift. I love you because you make good food. I love you because you took extra time with me. I love you because, and there's always a condition attached to that love. And often that love is expressed in response to either a condition or an action by another person. I remember a day when my wife and I were driving from Southern California to Arizona, to Phoenix, Arizona. I called up their car rental agency and I said, I need to rent a car because I decided to rent a car instead of driving my own. It would cost less money going to a conference. So I called up and I said, I'd like to reserve a car and I'll come and pick it up on XYZ day. And I reserved a very moderate, respectable, not too flashy car, right? Because I was going to a pastor's conference and of course you don't want to overextend and so forth. So the day came, I went to pick up the car and they sent me to space number 1. Well, most of the cars that I rent are in space 47 or 58 or something like that. So when they pointed me to space number 1, I had a little inkling that something was going amiss here and that something was different. So I walked out and the very first spot on the lot was space number 1. On an angle was a brand new 2-seat sports car. And I thought, oh boy, I'm going to be driving this sports car. And part of me was rejoicing. Another part of me was saying, that doesn't really play well. That image doesn't fit with who I am as a pastor, especially going to this conference. And I thought maybe I should go back and exchange it for a different, more moderate car, or at least go back and offer to pay the difference. Well, that thought lasted maybe a quarter of a second in my mind. I thought, I love this car. It's a beautiful car. It's a brand new sports car with 25 miles on it. So I didn't even break stride and I went to the car and I got in and I started to drive the car. And immediately upon driving that car, I know why people like it. And I went and picked up my wife and we headed out across the desert. And as I'm driving this car, I just can't stop saying, I love this car. I love this car. I love the way it handles it. You can turn it on a dime. I love the lights. They ignite. You don't turn the lights on, they ignite. I love the sound system on this car. I love the speed of this car. And of course, driving across the desert, I won't confess anything here, but it goes really fast. And it maneuvers really well without all the body roll and all that. I love this car. I kept telling my wife, I love this car. I love this car. I love this car. Well, as I got to thinking about it, I began to wonder, what would happen if I had this car? And one day, the lights didn't go on, or the radio didn't sound so good. What would happen if one day suddenly the suspension became soft and it rolled when I turned it? What would happen if one day I tried to accelerate and the engine was tired and old and it couldn't accelerate the way it did once before? What would happen when this car stopped performing at the level that it was originally intended, or at the level that it was the first time I drove it? I probably wouldn't be repeating, I love this car, I love this car. You see, because my love for that car was a responsive love. It was a love that was based upon how well the car performed. And when the car performed really well, my love was gushing and effusive and verbal. But if the car stopped performing well, my love would diminish in proportion to its performance. Many of us believe that God loves us because we perform well. Let me set the record straight. God does not love you because you perform well. God loves you with a motivating love that is within God's own nature to love you, despite, irrespective, regardless of your performance. Now, your performance, your behavior may disappoint God, but God loves you. God is motivated to reach out to you. God's motivating love drives him, and it's not connected to the measure of your performance. People who are walking in close proximity to God, people who are walking on the way of holiness, are going to find that their love becomes the motive that drives them to engage. Love is naturally overflowing from within them for other people. Not based upon how well they perform, not based upon what they can do for you, but simply a natural consequence of the image of God and God's holiness within you expressing itself in a motivating love that is not tied to results. You see, people on the way of holiness love like God loves, with a motivating love. So I'd like to encourage you, as you wrap up this particular chapter episode, I'd like you to take some time after you shut this off and quietly reflect on the people that are around you, the people that you love. Is that love a result of how they perform, or is it a love without measure? Invite God to help you discern that love that is within you, whether it is driven as a motive or whether it is tied to performance. And may God guide you gently. God bless you.